Welcome to Two Millennials and Mom, where we bring you engaging conversations and respectful disagreement across the social spectrum.
Injected with the quirks of everyday life.
Curl up as we navigate the complexities of this modern world with all the humor and warmth we can muster.
And the occasional gentle ribbing. We're glad you're here. Happy listening.
Hello, podcast land, and good morning. It is,
Good morning.
at least for me, a beautiful day here in South Texas. What about y'all?
It's a little chilly here.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it's lovely out there right now. It's like 65. It was a little chilly this morning when we got to the course.
I love it. So we were going to talk about reading today. I feel like there is so much that I am curious about with you guys. And I think that, we've talked about on this podcast alone, just what we feel like, how we feel so strongly about education. And I think reading is such a big part of that. And so we were going to cover all kinds of topics under this kind of umbrella today. And I'm excited to hear what you guys have to bring to the table. What gets you excited about reading?
When we were talking about this yesterday, it kind of got me thinking, and I think the why will be really interested, but like for me personally, I'm more, I guess I would say, passionate about the what and the how on this one. And so I'm really interested to hear y'all's answers as to kind of some of the questions we were asking.
Me too. And I think that I'm really curious, especially from the two of you and from your perspective. Our mom here, hello, is a reader. And I'm really curious, especially Cole, from you. Do you think that rubbed off on us?
Oh, for sure.
I definitely think
100%.
that it did.
Yeah,
But
mom reading so much is definitely why I had an interest as a kid, because she was always reading. And so it was, and I don't know, like my why for reading, I think might be a little bit different than mom's. But I think mom's, particularly the last few years, has maybe shifted a little bit, because I always remember when I was little, the books that you were reading most were novels. They were not really like fantasy, but I would say that they were. There was a lot of, you were reading a lot more fiction more consistently then, and so
lots of Nora Roberts.
Yeah, lots of Nora Roberts. That was kind of like my go-to Christmas present to you for years was, oh, there's a new Nora Roberts book out.
Yeah.
But like my why, the reason I read is because I watched you read and get so much enjoyment out of it. And then I started doing the same thing. And like for me, I read more for entertainment than I do for educating myself. And there's just really some fascinating stories and worlds that are built by authors that, for me, I don't really feel a better way to escape, to be somewhere else, than when I'm reading or listening to a book.
I'd go to a book before I'd go to TV. Because I think you could probably put my two favorite loves outside of you two together. I could have the radio on in the background and a book in my lap and be totally content. Somebody asked me the other day about if you were stranded on a desert island, what two things would you want? And my first thought was a book and music. Those are the things that I have to have. So when I was a little girl, my mom was also a reader, by the way. When I was a little girl, every summer, before I probably could read, my mom took us once a week to the library. We checked out as many books as they would allow us to check out that week. And I remember walking out with a stack, of books, and we would go home and all three of us would read. Now, my dad was not a reader. Not until real late in life did Daddy start reading. And just, you guys probably don't even know this, but my dad wrote a book. It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. It was a romance book, and it just embarrassed the crap out of Pamela and I, when we got it. He did it all shorthand on a legal pad, and she tried to transcribe it, but we couldn't do it.
How old were you when he wrote this book?
I mean, I had to probably be mid-30s, 40s.
Oh, okay.
When he wrote it.
Yeah.
And he was here. So, but no, mom always read, and she always let us read, and dad didn't, and he resented it some that we were always reading because we could be entertained so easily and didn't need him or pay attention to him. But I was thinking about this morning. I guess that was my thankful yesterday. Your dad has never ever complained about me reading, and I read a lot. I probably average about 175, 180 books a year. A lot of those, Cole, are fiction. A lot of those are, just novels, just for the fun. But several years ago, my sister and I we decided we were reading too many fiction books. And so we decided that we would start a book club together and we would read important books, whatever that means. But we've read some great books in that period of time. I mean, we've done probably all of Brene Brown's, Malcolm Gladwell. We've done some great ones, and we've done some not so great ones. There was one about mansplaining that we thought would be hysterically funny, and it was horribly depressing. And so,
Oh, no.
and honestly, she has a spreadsheet because as we go along our day and one of us runs across something or somebody recommends one to us, we'll go, oh, here's a book. And she adds it to the spreadsheet so that we always have a list of books available to read.
And it is a very, very detailed, in-depth, extensive spreadsheet. I've seen it a few times, and let me just say, it's a little overwhelming. I'm super impressed, but it's a little overwhelming too.
Yeah, it is. So, Callie, you surprised me the other day when we were going through some books here in your room, and you looked at me so intently. You said, "Mom, these are the books that made me want to be a reader." And I was really surprised.
I don't think that reading came quite as naturally, an interest in reading came quite as naturally for me as it did, especially for you and for Cole. I would tell you, I mean, like, I knew how to read-ish, but I would tell you that I really didn't get into reading, like to enjoying reading, not even for entertainment, but just to enjoying reading until I was in high school. And for me, that started with, as goofy as it sounds, judge away. I had a girlfriend in high school who introduced me to the Gossip Girl series. Long, long, long before it was a show, when they were originally coming out, when she was writing them in real time, and it was a big deal when a new one came out, and you went to Barnes and Noble and you went and bought the brand new one that just came out this week. And I fell in love because it was a totally and completely different world and a different perspective, and so far removed from anything that I knew. It was exciting. And looking back on it now, I never really got into the TV show, but looking back on it now, I think that started kind of forming my love of New York City. And then when we went after high school and I went for the first time, I was familiar. I was comfortable with everything. And I think it was because in my head, I'd already been there. I was already very familiar with everything and what it all was. I mean, gosh, you guys, reading a book, it does not replace going to the actual place. Like, I know that, I get that, but I wasn't scared about it. I had a general idea of what to expect and know what was where and what to look out for and be careful of and where was okay and where was questionable, just because I'd already been there in my head for a couple of years. And so I loved those books growing up. I do remember first getting into them, and I don't remember what started it off, but both you and Dad were like, we're not sure that these are books that you need to be reading. I mean, because you guys, it was high school kids doing drugs and having sex and doing bad things, which again was a complete world away from anything that I knew. I'd never heard of anybody doing drugs, and I kind of grew up a little more sheltered in my own little head. I sure wasn't having sex. And so it was almost I don't want to call it an escape, but it was just so different. It was so new and exciting. And so I remember Dad reading. He was like, I'll read it. I'll read it and see if it's acceptable for you. And I don't really remember Dad reading a ton growing up. I think he does a lot more now in audiobooks now. But I remember him picking up that book, and I don't think he made it through the first chapter before he threw it across the room. This is garbage and total smut, which as a high school girl made me want to read it that much more. And I loved them. I loved them. I thought they were fantastic, and I so enjoyed those books. And so from there, I was able to branch out and let me go find another one that's kind of similar. Oh, here's one about this girl who is an intern after college, and here's one in Los Angeles, and so fiction really was kind of the start of it for me. And then it evolved into education. And I love a good self-help book. I really do. But for more than anything for me, I like reading because I like having a better understanding of other perspectives beyond my own. Oh, I hadn't thought about it that way. Oh, I've never experienced anything like that. Oh, I didn't even know that was an option. And so it just is so educational for me to, even for fiction books, to hear different perspectives beyond my own. It has always been about that for me.
So I'm really curious because I don't remember that incident with your dad, and yet you continue to read them.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
How did you did we know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I don't remember
I
that
think
part.
I think that there was something along the lines like, if we start see your grades slipping and you start taking on these characteristics, then you will never be allowed to have those books ever again. And it just wasn't about that for me. So it never morphed into anything more. It was just me sitting in the corner, furiously reading this book to know what happened next.
Yeah,
It was
not
fun.
really a need to replicate the characters, but just being interested in their stories.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I don't remember that story, and I don't think I ever really censored what y'all were reading. I know, there was a point in time where if you were part of the Christian community, you weren't supposed to read Harry Potter because, that was demonic and things like that. And I know Cole read that. And I'm kind of embarrassed, but I've never read Tolkien. I've never read Harry Potter.
Me
Tolkien
neither.
is a difficult read. Like
I went to a couple of movies with you, but I never. That's
the
just not
movies
my
are
genre.
the movies are it's right up my alley. Like
Yeah, you've
I
always loved
love
fantasy.
fantasy and sci-fi are definitely
Sorry.
my go-to. Spaceships and laser beams or swords and knights and dragons, like either one, I'm happy.
I think my mom would have gone there with you.
Would you consider that your like primary preference? That
Oh,
genre?
for sure. For sure.
And Mom, what
Yeah.
would you consider your primary genre?
Oh gosh. I mean, I do like a good romance, but I don't necessarily want a smutty one. I want a funny one.
Yeah.
You know, you and I have done this. Megan Quinn wrote one. What's it called?
The road trip, the ultimate road trip, I think is what it was.
It's not it, but it's something like that. And one of the things in that book was that the dad, they decided to take a road trip across America with the family. The mom has passed away, I think, and the brother's best friend goes, and the dad is driving this big RV, and the way he cusses is with presidents' names. So when he gets really mad, it's like Ronald Reagan or and I died.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
That one's such a good one. Ulysses S. Grant, I literally printed out a list of presidents so I'd have names to cuss. That sounds really
The
weird
Mother
saying
Road.
it right there, but it was funny to me. And so I love them when they're funny.
I would tell you I probably am like split. I'm probably 60% fiction, fun, and 40% nonfiction. Let me learn something. But there are also authors that I really love. Like, Mom, I shared this with you. I think it was probably last year. An author called, her name is Sittenfeld, I think is what it is. And I love reading her books on my Kindle because it stretches my vocabulary. I do not know what that word means. Can you define that for me? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And so it has been so fun for me to learn in that way that I've always loved. I like to learn. And so I love books that kind of push like that.
But, I think that's a really valid point. I think reading does increase your vocabulary. It does stretch you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. I think I'm pretty drastically different. You said you're probably 60-40 with fiction, nonfiction. I might be 90-10. It's probably closer to like 98-2. I don't read a lot of nonfiction books. I cannot
Really?
stand self-help books. They're so boring. Like I
Oh.
just can't get through them. I've tried and tried and tried, and I just can't. They're dry, and I mean, maybe it's just the stubbornness in me, but like telling me how to do a basic task is just as dull as it can possibly be, in my opinion. For me, it's all about it has to be interesting. It has to be a story that is not this mundane thing. And so here recently, I've been reading more nonfiction this year. But they're like mostly history, which is always something that I've been interested in. But it's always something that I've done more like individual research on, reading articles and going online and finding that stuff out, and less getting that information from books. And so, but like this year, I've listened to a book on the FBI and a book on the CIA and how kind of it started and evolved up until the early 2000s. And I read one on kind of the Bush administration and their relationship with the CIA as we went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And those were really, really interesting reads, but they were also a little bit depressing. And so like I just kind of finished them, and I was like, all right, I'm going to go ahead and put this back away for now, and I'm going to go back to my heroes and villains story and kind of be content over there.
I love a good memoir. I love a good memoir. Like, I'm thinking about, I can't tell you, I went and looked. I lost count at 6. But I went and looked on Amazon how many times I have purchased Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes, which is her memoir. Shonda Rhimes of Grey's Anatomy and How to Get Away with Murder and all of those shows. I can't think of any of the other ones right now, which I enjoyed. But for some reason, I don't even remember why I started reading this one, but it's her memoir. And the whole premise, Cole, is everybody always assumes that she's going to say no to everything. Like, she has all of these opportunities. She's going to say no because you always say no. And so she challenged herself. It was Thanksgiving one year. Her sister kind of called her out on it. And she was like, you have this great opportunity. You're going to say no. So why do we even bother talking about it? And I think it kind of put a burr in her saddle, if you will. And she was like, well, why do I always say no? And so she challenged herself to say yes to all of the things that scared her for the next year. And
it's a great book.
It's a great book. So that's what I was saying. Like, I think I've purchased it and handed it out 6 times at least because I just love it. It's not depressing. It's not sad. It's just fun and joyful. I love reading about joy.
I tend not to reread. I mean, once I've read it, I've done it, and in all honesty, a lot of times it's gone. Once I'm over, that storyline is gone. Now, if I happen to pick it up, 2 years later, I'll go, oh, I've already read this, and I won't be able to tell you what the ending is, but I'll know enough about it that I know that I've read it. But that book, The Year of Yes by Shonda Rhimes, I've read multiple times.
And I reference routinely.
Yeah, it's a valuable book.
Yes. I mean, I reference entire chapters of that book routinely. There's a whole chapter in there about how to take a compliment. You don't need to say, "Oh, thanks for liking my top. I got it on sale." Thank you is enough. You don't need to diminish yourself in other ways. And so there's so much just really good practical information in it that I just love. I just loved that book, and I recommend it to everyone.
And would you recommend it to Cole?
Sure. Do I think Cole would get as much out of it as he might something else? Maybe not. But in terms of a memoir, it's fantastic. It's so, so, so good. I'm also thinking, I think it was last year I read The End of Normal by Stephanie Madoff Mack. She was married to one of Bernie Madoff's sons when everything kind of shit hit the fan. This sounds awful. Of the two sons, not the one that died of cancer, the one who committed suicide. And she wrote it afterwards. And I don't even remember how I ended up reading it, but I was so broken for her and what she went through. I remember when I finished it, I actually reached out to her on Instagram, was like, I just want you to know, thank you for writing this book. I enjoyed reading it so much. My heart hurts for you. I am praying that you're in a better place now and that you get to be happy, because everybody deserves to be happy. It just was so powerful. I didn't know a lot of that story. I think I was too young to really be paying attention when all of that scandal hit. And so this was such an interesting view on that, and from the kind of the inside of it and how it was all handled and what it all looked like and meant from her perspective. And I just loved that.
So, Boo, tell me what your favorite book is.
That's really, really hard for me. I don't know that I have a specific favorite.
Can you narrow it down to series?
That's what I'm trying to do, but even then, there are so many that I have read that I just really, really fell in love with the characters. I would say that in recent years, it would probably be a toss-up between a series that's called Galaxy's Edge, that is kind of more sci-fi, and another much. There aren't as many books, but they're kind of more tomes than novels. That's called The Chronicles of the Unhewn Throne, which is one that is it's just a really interesting world that the author kind of created, and the way that that world operates on a physical and spiritual level is just the way that it's thought out, and that universe is created was one there. When I read the cover, I was like, I don't know, this sounds like it might be really kind of strange. And then I read the first book and I just couldn't put it down. It was like, give me more. And only 3 have come out since then. And that was probably 5 years ago. And so it's one of those ones where I'm just like, please, every time I log into Amazon, I'm like, please tell me there's another one coming. Please tell me there's another one coming, because that one was just really, really interesting. That one's tough. But there are so many just fantastic series that I have read. I've just started a new one and I'm on the second book, and it's really interesting, but I don't have enough from it yet to say that it's one of my favorites. But I mean, it kind of just dumps you into this universe and immediately starts exploring kind of these different philosophies and different ideas about different perspectives. I mean, it touches on racism, it touches on slavery, it touches on the qualities of leadership, it touches on philosophy, between the difference between moral and ethical. And that's all within the first half of the first book. And I was just kind of like, whoa, they're really going deep fast here. To kind of, and it's not necessarily that they're discussing these ideas in depth. It's almost more like they're telling a story where the characters are experiencing these different facets. And so it's not necessarily like this big kind of cerebral approach to all of these subjects. It's almost more like a, what's the term that I'm looking for? Like a subtextual, this is just kind of how life in this universe is. And it's really interesting to kind of hear each, because it follows several different characters, kind of like the Game of Thrones does, where they're all in these very different positions, from like the lowliest of the low slaves all the way up to the most powerful people on the face of their planet, um, and kind of how they view different aspects of their world and approach them differently. And it's been really, really interesting so far.
So I have a question. Would y'all rather read the book or see the movie?
Read the book, no question.
I would rather read the book. In fact, I read, I think it's called The Last Thing He Told Me. It was released here a few years ago, and I inhaled it. I mean, just flew through it. I loved it. It was so unique and so interesting. And then I think it was on Netflix or Apple TV, but they did a limited series. Jennifer Garner played the lead role, and I was like, oh, this is going to be great. And the show was great, but you don't get the immersion that you get in
Yeah.
a book. You
There's
don't
so
get
much
to
less context.
feel
There's
it
less
all.
opportunity for context, where if you're reading an author, they can have a 3 or 4 page spiel describing this one person, but in the movie, it's a 3-second scene as they walk into the scene, and that's all you get. There's so much more
Room.
like,
You said it so well earlier. There's
yeah.
just room for it.
Yeah, they're with a movie, you have to try and take this, what could be this big, huge, long thing. I mean, the books that I'm reading right now, the audio versions are 50 hours long.
Woo!
Well, if you try and compact that into a 3-hour movie, you're missing out on so much. There's so much less context, that
Detail.
that you have to interpret for yourself. And if you don't have the script there that the author has written, you don't necessarily know what they're trying to tell you. You get what someone else who's filming it is trying to tell you. I don't know that I would ever say that there has been a book that I have read that was improved by having a movie of it.
Yeah. I will say this. So fantasy is not my genre, not even kind of a little bit. I have never read Harry Potter. I think I tried to make it through the first book when I was in middle school and maybe made it through a chapter before I was like, okay, I'm bored. Like, this is not interesting at all to me. I've never watched or read Game of Thrones. I've never fall asleep during every one of the Lord of the Rings movies. I'm sure not going to sit down and read those books. But the first one that kind of got me in that genre, don't laugh. You're going to laugh, but just keep it at a reasonable volume. What?
Can I guess?
Yes.
I think I know what it is. Does it have
I'm
vampires in it?
It does.
Yeah.
Does it have what in it?
Vampires and werewolves.
So the whole Twilight craze, I was out of college. I was in my first job, and it took over everything, and everybody was crazy about it, and I was completely uninterested. No, thank you. I don't want to watch this. I have no interest in this. No. And my friend Kristen was like, no, Callie, you've got to watch it. And I think there were probably 2 or 3 movies out by the time that she finally convinced me to watch it the first time. And so I watched the movie. She'd read all of the books. I watched the movie and I was like, oh, whatever. Like, I'll do this for you, but I don't want to watch this. And I watched that movie and I was like, oh my God, how did I miss this? I've been missing this my whole life. And so then I went and read all of the books. And
I think you borrowed them from me.
I probably did. I think you're right. But the books were so much better than the movie. And the movie was great, but the books just blew it out of the water. And so I feel like that is the only one that I did it backwards. Like, I watched the movie first and then read the books. And so I got so much more out of it rather than feeling disappointed that I wasn't getting enough. And so that's probably my only, I was going to say that's probably my only foray into fantasy. But last year, Megan's book club online had suggested the audio version, not reading it. Do not read the book. You have to listen to the audio book or it will not be nearly as good. She had recommended a book called Devolution by Max Brooks. And it was about like Sasquatch attack up in like Seattle. And it was so cool. that again, Sasquatch is not my thing. But my dad thinks that they're funny and we laugh at those commercials and I was like, okay, whatever. I'll listen to the audiobook at some point.
Is this the one that all three of you were doing together?
One
It
of
was
them.
a weird
series?
book.
Super weird. But the audiobook was so cool because it was narrated by a full cast of people that you know. And so like Jeff Daniels is one of the main characters, and Judy, I can't think of what her name is. She's the mean girl in 13 Going on 30. Like all of these big names are narrating this book, and so it's like watching a movie without the screen. But because, kind of like Cole and I were talking about a minute ago, because you have the full swath of it, you don't have to condense everything into this hour and a half, 3-hour movie. You still got the full length and all of the detail of the book. It was just so much fun. And it's goofy and it's weird and it's strange. And it just was so much fun. I loved that.
Yeah, I went through, I think the first one that I ever read that was really like a full-on production like that was Dune. And that one was the full cast version of the Dune audiobook was so good that I was scared to watch the movie because I was pretty certain I was going to be disappointed. And I went and watched the movie in theaters, like in IMAX with a buddy of mine. And he was so excited about going to see it and loved it so much. And I just walked out of the theater and I was like, meh. Like it was fine.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Like it was good. It was well done, but it just wasn't the same.
So, Boo, I would say 90% of yours is audio.
These days, yeah, most of it is audio. I used to do a lot of reading physical books, like especially when I was a kid. We had very robust collections in our school libraries. That was one of the best parts about, I would say, DISD, is that their libraries were extremely robust, like better than our public libraries in Denton, I would say personally. And so I did a ton of reading physical books when I was a kid. And then once I kind of got out of school, I started working at a bar here in town as the door guy. And it was a pretty calm bar. There wasn't a lot of bouncing that I actually had to do. And so instead of having a physical book, I switched over to Kindle because it was just so convenient. I could just prop my phone up on my door guy stand. And at that point, because I was sitting there for 40 hours a week checking IDs, I was tearing through book series. It was like I was kind of with Mom, where during that time frame, I was probably pushing 80 to 100 books a year, no problem, because that's just kind of what I did, is I would sit there and read. And then I got to a point, I don't remember what the first one was. I do remember what it was. It was Galaxy's Edge, because I had started reading these books, and I was on, because they were available on Kindle Unlimited. And so Kindle Unlimited is just like a subscription service where you pay, it's like $8 or $9 a month, and you get access to their whole library. And so you can kind of check books out and return them. And so I was just tearing through anything that I could get my hands on. And I pulled up this one. It was like, hey, suggested for you, Galaxy's Edge. And the first book in that series is called Legionnaire. It's by two authors, Jason Anspach and Nick Cole. And while some people may not like their politics, the dudes are fantastic authors when it comes to the sci-fi, kind of military sci-fi genre. And the entire series has been very well done. They're still writing books for it, but it's so deep now that. But anyways, this one had, when I bought it, when I downloaded it on Kindle Unlimited, it said, hey, for 99 cents, you can get the audio version too. And I was like, well, I've never really listened to audiobooks. I guess I'll give it a try. And at the time, most of the Kindle Unlimited library had this, I can't remember the name of the feature. I think it's called Whisper Sync, though. And basically, you can listen to the audio and read at the same time. It's almost like subtitles. And so it's coming up and it's highlighting the words as you read them. So I could sit there on my door guy stool all night and read, and then once it was time to close and for me to go start like doing my closing chores, putting bar stools up, wiping down tables, all of that stuff, I could throw my headphones in and continue listening and not have to take a break. And that is kind of where I started listening to audiobooks, because the guys that do the narration for those Galaxy's Edge books are fantastic. It is Ray Porter is one of their big guys who does a lot of their books. R.C. Bray. R.C. Bray just has this real deep, gravelly kind of I'm a badass voice, and he reads the entire thing that way, and he does a phenomenal job. And so that's kind of where I started. Like, I get the best of both worlds. I get this fantastic performance by someone, but it also still is, to me, very similar to reading a book. So I'm building out these images and this story in my head without having someone else take over my imagination for me. So that there's kind of this greater suspension of disbelief, if you will, because I am building it out in my own head as opposed to having someone show it to me. But that kind of evolved a few years later. I started working at a different job where I was working with my hands all day long, but I was by myself. There wasn't really anyone to talk to most of the day. And between jobs, I was driving for an hour and a half between these different
Beauty.
job sites. Yeah. And so I would be by myself in the car for 6 out of a 10-hour day, just going back and forth. And it's really hard to read a book while you're driving, but I could listen to it. And I've just found some really fantastic. I am one of those guys where I always have to be consuming media. I have to have I have to have music on, or a TV on, or playing a game, just because like I want to be doing more than one thing at a time so I can try and fit as much in. And so it's become so much easier to do two things at once, listening to a book and doing something else. And I think I'm less engrossed in the stories that I'm listening to when I'm doing that, but I still get kind of the best of both worlds. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm almost the exact opposite. Like, I love a good audiobook, but I find myself, I like efficiency, right? So I'm going to listen to this audiobook while I'm cleaning the house, or while I'm doing this, or while I'm driving. And then I'm like, oh shoot, what happened? Why are they talking about that? Rewind. Okay, yeah, here's where I was. This I remember. Oh shoot. Callie, you've rewound this section 4 times. Pay attention. And I just kind of get in my own way. I'm trying to be too efficient, and I'm not doing a good job at it. But I will say, I think, was it last year or the year before, Cole, you and Dad and I all got on a series by an author called A American. And it's like the Going Home series. And it was about a guy who, an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, had hit the United States. And so every electronic device gone. And so it's all of these people trying to figure out what's next, and what happened, and what's going on, and what do we do now, and how do we survive if you don't have a grocery store, and what do you have stockpiled. And we flew through those books one after the other. Are you done with this one? What do you think about that one? Did you see where this went? And it was so fun to do that with y'all, because we got to talk about it. It's almost like it gave us an excuse to chat and check in with each other. And don't get me wrong, I for sure went and built my own little, my neighbor calls them zombie boxes, but my little go bags and things like that, just in case anything ever happened. But they were so much fun to read and so enjoyable, because again, it's such a different perspective than I'd ever been privy to before.
Y'all had so many conversations over those books.
I would read them
I was
again.
worn out. I never touched one of them, and I was worn out from y'all having conversations over those books.
I think we need to pick those back up, because I think we only made it to book like 10 or 11.
Yeah.
And I think there's like 17 or 18.
Really? I was literally earlier this week, I recommended them to somebody. I'm like, okay, you need to try this. If you're looking for something fun, like, these are really great, and it's kind of weird, but God, they were good.
Okay, that's a good question. I have a book series by Jan Karen. It's about a Episcopalian, older Episcopalian priest, and it's that series that I go, if you want one that just feels good and is enjoyable, go read the Mitford series by Jan Karen. So you talked about recommending that one, Cole. What do you recommend?
See, that's a really tough one for me because everybody's tastes are so different. And so I would say that I probably have a couple. If you want to read sci-fi, I would definitely consider giving Galaxy's Edge a try. It's kind of like, I would say it's like a more adult version of Star Wars if the stormtroopers were the good guys, which is a kind of a bonkers thing to say for like a Star Wars fan to hear. But trust me, like if you liked Star Wars, go read Galaxy's Edge. It's fantastic. If you want fantasy, then I mean, if you haven't already, Game of Thrones is a very good read. The TV show is great. The books are much better. Just be prepared to wait because he takes forever. When I first started reading them, the guy who introduced me to it, he said, there's one thing you need to understand before you start reading these books. George R. R. Martin is really, really, really good at cooking dinner and making it smell fantastic, but he's really, really bad at serving it. You'll never actually get it. And
What does that mean?
He's really good at building up all of these different storylines, but there's never a conclusion.
Leaving you hanging.
Yeah.
That might make me crazy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, eventually we're supposed to get a final book, but he's been saying that for, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. I think the most recent book in Game of Thrones came out when I was in college. That was 13, 14 years ago now. Yeah, 13 years ago. And so there are also a bunch of like much shorter, smaller fantasy series that are like they're good, but not necessarily ones that I would recommend. Trying to think if there is a book that I think everyone should read. And you asked me this question yesterday, and I couldn't really come up with one. I would say my favorite book that I've ever read, and one of the only ones I've read twice. One, the Galaxy's Edge series, I have read more than one time. But the other one is Alas, Babylon by Pat Frank. It's kind of in the same vein as the Surviving or Coming Home series, but it's set in like the late 60s, early 70s kind of Cold War era, and a nuclear war with Russia happens. And it's this family in Florida who the guy is like a Korean War vet who is kind of just this like lounge around bachelor because he's got kind of some of this trauma from the Korean War, and so he just kind of lives at his parents' estate in Florida in this kind of private community, and all of a sudden his brother, who is still like a high-ranking officer in the Air Force, calls him and he's like, "Hey, it's going down. I'm sending my wife and kids. Take care of them." And this guy has kind of just been by himself, been like almost like not really the black sheep, but kind of just like the, "Hey, I'm over here doing my thing. Leave me alone." And now they have to build this kind of community, and their neighbors kind of get together, and everything has kind of just gone to hell. And the struggles that the main character has with himself in that book, I think, are really interesting and powerful perspectives for anyone to kind of think about. Hey, how would I handle a situation like this? What would I do? And so I would say Alas, Babylon is, if it's not my number one, it's probably in my top 3 and one that I would recommend to anyone.
I feel kind of that same way. Mom, you and Dad read a book ages ago called Same Kind of Different as Me by Ron
yeah.
Hall and Denver Moore. And it is completely true. It's kind of a memoir of these two men, and they are It's two men from totally and completely different sides of the tracks. It's a
Yes,
white man
Denver's
who's
homeless and
well-to-do, and then Denver's a homeless man who grew up a slave, like was born into slavery originally. They were there in Fort Worth, and it's them trying to figure out how to navigate each other and becoming friends, and becoming like lifelong confidants, because their differences were so vast and so drastic that they found the similarities in it, and it's just beautiful. I've
they
purchased it several times
they
and sent it
yeah,
off to people.
that's the one that I've bought more than one time and handed
Mhm.
out. Yeah, because they meet through his wife. She's he's an art dealer, and she is involved with a soup kitchen,
Yeah,
and she
volunteering.
pretty much just goads him into going. He has no intention of getting involved, and
Yeah.
he's not doing this, and and
You're
then
gonna do this now.
yeah, and then she convinces him. He gets involved with Denver, and it literally
Begrudgingly.
is a years long until Denver's death. That because there's a couple of books that they've written together.
Mhm.
So I was gonna ask you, because I'm sitting here looking at the two of you thinking both of your names came from books. Callie, yours was a genealogy book,
Mhm.
and Cole, yours came. Your dad was reading a Time Life series about the gunslingers and the younger brothers, and so uh, that's where yours came from. So tell me, what book has been a heavy influence? Okay, I'm going to go first.
Okay, go.
I read a book called Mr. God, This is Anna. It's about a little girl who they're in England. She is pretty much just abandoned. I think she's 4 or 5 years old when he finds her. And Finn, who is probably in his 20s and has a really good heart, just can't leave her on the street. And she has such a unique perspective of how she sees life. And so she talks to God, Mr. God, this is Anna. And she talks to him. And I would say it was very influential in that it just opened my perspective on how to see God. So I think that one was it.
I don't know that I have just one. Like, I feel like there's bits and pieces out of several that have just really stuck with me. Same kind of different as me for sure. I think that finding those commonalities, and it tackles racism in such a unique, interesting way, I think is just super powerful. Um, I love Year of Yes. To find joy in your life, this is what you do. I mean, she couldn't be any more clear about it. I think she does such a good job at kind of throwing herself under the bus for your sake. I love historical fiction, as goofy as that sounds, because I don't feel like I ever paid enough attention in school to pick up history. And so it gives me a good insight into what's going on. All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Dewar is about a blind girl in World War II and a kid who is going through Nazi youth, and them kind of not finding each other, and they didn't know each other, but it gave me interest and insight into what was going on in World War II and what that kind of felt like. Again, I like perspective. I think I have said this before. I think A Return to Common Sense by Lee McGowan should be standard reading for all Americans. This is how our government works. This is how it was set up. These were the intentions. This is what it was supposed to do. These are ways in which we have kind of gone rogue, and why that is impactful, I think, is, again, mandatory reading for every American. There was also
because
a book.
she does such a good job of
Such a good job.
explaining our government
Very clearly, and to where you can absorb it and you're like, oh, I didn't know that. And it's a really good thing. I also read one, a boss of mine here ages ago had asked me to read The Pumpkin Plan, and it's about building a business, and you're like, oh, that sounds so boring. And
Isn't it the
it just,
pumpkin patch?
no, it's called The Pumpkin Plan.
Okay.
And so it's about spending your energy on the one prize pumpkin instead of a little bit of energy on all of the pumpkins to hope one of them develops really big. And so it's making a plan to cherish and foster this one pumpkin is just really great. And then I'm a big fan of gifting books. I loved, especially to kids, to gift books. I think they're called the Imagineers. It's the Imagineer series, I think is what it's called. Rosie Revere, engineer, and Sophia Valdez, future pres, and Iggy Peck, architect. I feel like is such a fun way to encourage kids to go after what it is that excites them, and to realize, or maybe not realize, but maybe more to break down any walls and things that have been put in place for kids. And so they get to then go and really use that as a launch pad to do whatever it is that they want to do.
Especially girls.
Especially girls, and STEM and science and math and technology. Like, this isn't just for boys, it's okay. And so I loved those. I gift them for birthday parties and baby showers because I just think that they're so powerful.
So you just talked about gifting. The books that we pulled out of your room that, you said, this is where I learned, this is where I got excited about reading. I sent those to Pamela, who took them to a juvenile detention center. She had a group of people, and she had 127 books go into, and what she found out is that these kids they're under 18, they're in juvie, they don't have a lot of things to entertain them, and so books are really big things for them. And so she was really excited to be able to provide a whole bunch of books for these kids to be able to read.
I love
So
that.
there's always something to do to, not that I get rid of very many books. I don't do that. I did just read James, which was James just got the book award, the National Book Award for fiction. So James is written from the perspective of Jim and Huckleberry Finn. And Mark Twain's one of my favorites, so I was interested in this one. It was a little bit hard to read. It was from that other perspective. I think the fascinating thing is Jim is a very intelligent man who has learned to cope with the society that he's been forced into. So he behaves one way when white people are around, and another way when white people are not around, which was a really fascinating perspective. And so, like I said, Mark Twain's one of my picks, and so this was really an interesting to win and to see him do such a good job with the book and the perspective. So I guess I was going to say I'm not very good about, like, I don't usually read Oprah's picks or that kind of deal, because some of those are really hard for me. So this one was up there and was a good book to read.
I'm really bad about choosing a book by its cover. And I'm like, oh, that looks good and interesting. And so that's kind of as far as I go most of the time. I like the surprise of it. And so I'm like, oh, let's do it. And so I don't have any idea where it's going or what's going on. When I started that one about Sasquatches, like, all I knew was you should listen to the audiobook, and then Sasquatch are attacking people. And so I'm not very good at keeping, how do I say that? I'm really good at judging the book by its cover, and that's it. Just that.
That's fun.
That's interesting, because, like, for me, it's never really about the cover art. It starts with the title. Like, it has to have a really good title that catches me. Legionnaire was one, like Galaxy's Edge Legionnaire, and you're like, okay. And then if it's got a good title, then you have to read that inside cover or read the back, and that has to grab me. If it doesn't, I'm not going to pick it up.
I never read the back, ever.
Do you ever read the end before you read the book?
Never.
Read the end of the book?
Yeah.
No.
Lots of people go and read the end first to decide if they want to read it.
Point?
Yeah. No way. No way. I'd like the surprise.
Yeah.
That's like. Do you always finish? Or do you ever be like, no, I'm not interested in this, I'm out?
very hard for me not to finish a book, no
Yeah,
matter
I
how
would
bad it is.
say so. I'm maybe I can say that I'm just really good at picking good books because I don't really remember. Like, there may have been one or two where I got more than a chapter or two in and put it down. But hey, does it have a good title? Read the back of the book. If the back of the book is interesting, like if the back of the book is well written and makes you want to read it, that book is probably going to be decent. If you just kind of dive into something not knowing what you're getting into, then you have an opportunity for it to be bad. I feel like,
I think I'm
and
so
so
curious that I feel like anybody can write 200 characters and make it sound interesting. So I feel like reading the back of the book serves me no purpose. I'm like, oh,
feel
they're
totally
either a great
different.
author or they're not a great author, and I'll figure it out as I go. I'll make that
Yeah,
judgment as I'm reading.
like I find myself doing that a lot. Like if I've got some credits on Audible and I'm like, okay, what's next to listen to? Like I'm gonna go read that kind of. I guess you would call that a hook, maybe,
Yeah.
but
Summary.
not even a summary. Like almost more like a trailer.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
trailer.
And so, like, if I read that trailer and I'm not like, this sounds interesting, then I mean, see ya. And it could be a great book, but if that trailer doesn't sound appealing, I'm out.
That's my curiosity though. Like every trailer sounds appealing. I want to know. I want to know more. I'm
Yeah,
curious where this is going.
I don't feel the same way.
That's
So I
fair.
read two that I wasn't sure about the trailer and turned out to be two of my very favorite books. One of them was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue.
Oh, uh-huh.
The story is she makes a deal, and so she never dies. And so it takes her through years and years and different scenarios that play out over that 100 and something years, I guess. So really, that one, the writing was so well done. So well done. And the other one that I thought, I'm not sure about this one, was Olivetti. Olivetti's about a typewriter. The
Yes.
typewriter is the main character, and it was just an absolutely precious book. I'm so glad that I read it. It was really good.
See,
Yeah.
I'm the fantasy sci-fi guy, but that seems so abstract to me. I don't know if I'd be able to get into something like that.
I felt the same way, Cole. It was a great book. And I think part of this is I really love words.
Mhm.
So when you can put the words together and in that way that just reaches out to me, I'm in a happy place.
It's almost like watching a painting come together without
Yes.
seeing the painter.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm so glad you're both readers. It makes me really happy.
Okay, so Mom, what did you say the book that was most impactful on you?
Mr. God, this is Anna.
Okay. And Gig, which one was yours?
I have no idea. I don't pick one. That sounds like picking a favorite child. Like I just can't.
Yeah. See, I had one that just sprung to my head earlier, and I actually have three that I think were really impactful to me. Two in kind of the same way. Mom, you probably remember these. This was a series that I read when I was much younger. It was called The Guardians of Ga'Hoole, and it was about a group of sentient owls. And then there was another series that I read in the same time frame that was called the Pendragon series. It was about a high school aged boy named Bobby Pendragon who kind of gets pulled into this chaotic, magical universe saving role. But I think the thing that impacted me the most about those two books are that you don't have to have a big circle. You can have a small circle, but that circle is really, really important. And you go to bat for your friends, even when they're wrong. And your circle is one of the most important things to you, because those are the people who can pull you out of anything. The other one that really kind of sprung to mind is one that I would say this was a required reading for us. I'm going to say probably sometime in middle school. It might have been elementary, but it is Johnny Tremain, which... Have you read Johnny Tremain, Mom?
Huh?
Johnny Tremain is a story about a 14-year-old boy in Boston 2 years before the Revolutionary War starts. And so it's kind of this angsty teenager, but in 1773. And he goes through, and it kind of basically goes up all the way to the very start of the Revolutionary War, and just kind of how he approaches things. And I think that one of the biggest lessons that I learned from Johnny Tremain is that it's okay to be proud of something that you have done, but that's not the same as being prideful.
That's valid.
And so I would say that those three series, particularly in my younger years, would have been the ones that had the biggest impact on me.
What about The Giving Tree? I know I read that to y'all.
Yeah, that's
That's a
one that
great
I
one.
definitely wanted to bring up today. That should be required reading for everyone. Like,
I
that
agree.
should be in every, hey, you just had a baby, this should be a book that you read to them.
Yep, I agree. I still reference that regularly.
Same. Still one of my favorite books. That and Go Dogs Go.
Would you ever write a book?
I would love to write a book. I have thought about writing books several times in my life. I don't know that I have the discipline to sit down and do it.
I agree. I feel the exact same way. What would you want it to be about? What do you think you would pick?
I would say it would probably be in one of three categories. It would probably be some sort of historical fiction, or something sci-fi, or something fantasy.
Yeah. I
So
heard
just a little segue, going back to Shel Silverstein. Did y'all know he wrote A Boy Named Sue? He did.
I did not.
He's a musician.
No.
So let's talk about that real quick, because I'm really interested to hear, because we talked about the ones that were most impactful to us and how we would definitely recommend those. If there was one book that you should tell everyone you should read this, that's not The Giving Tree, what would it be? If you could only say there's one book that I think you have to read.
Same kind of different as me.
I love that. Oh, gosh. I would probably go with Addie LaRue. I thought that was such a good book, and there were so many things that came out of that I mean, I just highlighted and highlighted and highlighted over that. So I mean, that's really hard for me. There are so many good books. There's one called My Grandmother Asked Me to Tell You She's Sorry. And I struggled with that book for the longest time. I mean, the people are mean in it. And I was really struggling. But the story is so good in the end that I think that's a good one. I mean, I don't know. That's a hard one.
I have another question for you too. So my answer to this question is also an answer that I just remembered to a question that y'all asked earlier, a book that you didn't finish. What do you think the worst book you've ever read was, or your least favorite?
The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Hated it, hated it, hated it, hated it. I'm still mad about it. Cheryl, I still blame you for it. I hated that book. I hated it. I hated it. I hated it.
What was it about?
People on a college campus murdering their friends. I hated it. I hated it. I hated it. It was awful.
Fair enough. Mom?
Tell us how you really felt about that one, Cal.
I thought it was atrocious. And she's supposed to be this like absolutely fantastic author of our generation, and I hated it. I hated it.
Okay, I'm going to change. There are two other books. The Atul Gawande book about being mortal was amazing. And then for us Southerners, there was one called Robert E. Lee and Me. And it was such an amazing perspective growing up in the South the way I did. It it's worth reading. There was a book, Men Explain Things to Me by Rebecca Solnit. I did not like that book at all, and will never ever read anything by her again.
Yeah.
Catcher in the Rye.
Catcher in the Rye?
Catcher in the Rye is the most awful book I have ever picked up. It's terrible.
I never read
It's
that.
boring. The characters are annoying and not likable.
Yeah.
It's awful. I have no idea why it is required reading, or was when I was in school. Catcher in the Rye is a terrible book.
That's fascinating.
I didn't even finish it. I don't know how I passed the tests,
That's
but
what
I
Cliff Notes are for.
refused to read that book.
Amazing. Well, maybe we need to put a list of these books on our show notes, because there's lots of really good ones.
Beware and hey, try these.
I like it. We can do that.
Okay.
All right.
And y'all ready to do good stories?
I
Yes.
have a good news story. Well, it's good news for me. I probably have the sharpest tongue out of the three of us. There's no probably. I definitely have the sharpest tongue out of the three of us. But I was very, very excited to brag about in one of our most recent episodes being the one with the least amount of swear words. That's my win this week. I was super happy about it.
Congratulations.
I just think our swear words are less intense than your swear words.
That's true.
So, okay, I want to tell y'all about my good story is about a football player. His name is, well, dadgummit. He is a Londoner, and he's 17 years old. Toby Hastrup. He's a UK native, and he had never played football before. The
American
coaches, American football, real football with a little brown football. He had never played football before, but the other coaches, he was running track and field, and the other coaches came to the football coach and said, "You need to look at this kid. He is so fast." And the first game he played, he got called offside because he didn't know the difference between defense and offense and how to do things. He's 6'4", 240 pounds, and he has all kinds of colleges looking at him because he's such an amazing athlete. And so I just think it's so excited that here is this kid, this 17-year-old kid who is just making waves, and everybody's looking at him, and he doesn't know a thing about football that he's playing it.
I can't wait to see what his future looks like.
Yeah, I want to see him play in the league.
Oh, yeah.
I would watch the game.
Yeah. You'll have to keep us updated as to where he goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he's got lots of choices because I think the last count that I heard was like 23 different colleges
Wow.
are recruiting him. And some
For a
of them
kid
were
who hasn't played a full solid season of football.
Exactly. Yeah, 23 Division I offers, including Oregon, Florida State, USC, LSU, Michigan.
Wow.
Dang.
Is that not cool?
That's
That's neat.
awesome.
I love it.
Okay, we had another weird thought that we talked about that I forgot about, but I just noticed it, and I really want to hear y'all's answers because I need a minute to think about mine. If you could live in the world or universe of any of the fictional books that you have read, which one would it be?
I think I'd probably, just because I felt really at home when I was reading these as a kid, the Louisa May Alcott's, and where she was living with her mom and her sisters and writing and learning how to be who she was supposed to be. It might, I mean, that's a weird place for me to think of, but I was just so comfortable reading those books.
I think for me, it would be like, it sounds so goofy, but like, I think that it would be something very different than my everyday life, like just because it's different. And so I think it would be fun for something like Gossip Girl or The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, I mean, she was an actress with this extensive career and had all of these crazy things and stories. Like I kind of like that opulence. It's fun to read about and hear about, and running into these parties and being so bored with everyone because your life is just so grand. Like it sounds kind of fun. So I think that would be fun.
This is really hard. I think mine would probably be a book series called King's League that I've been reading over the last few years. Just because I think it would be fun. I think it would be interesting. It's basically the regular world, except there is this VR video game that exists that is like so immersive you can't tell that you're not in the real world, and it's kind of set in this fantasy setting, and then you can kind of jump in and compete against other people in battle, and then you can hop out and go back to everyday life. I think
I
that
can
would
see you doing that.
I think that would
Yeah.
probably be mine.
I can
Oh,
see
yeah.
you doing that. Well, you guys,
That or
I
Lord of the
am
Rings.
really,
Lord of the Rings would be wild too. I'd definitely be like a wood elf or something. That'd be fun.
I really am glad you read, and I'm glad that you like it, and I'm glad that we can talk about them and share them and have a lot of fun with it.
I think it's interesting how all three of us have spent so much time around each other, and our taste in books is so vastly different.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. But yet there's still some shareable moments in there. So
Yeah, every once in a while they intersect.
yeah, that's kind of fun. Bury me with a book.
Same.
I want to be cremated, so don't do that.
I was going to say, at least do it with my Kindle so I have options.
Okay. All right. Can do.
100%. I love you both. Today has been awesome.
It's been fun, y'all.
Love you guys.
Love you guys.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Bye.